So a warm welcome to everybody. I know we haven't seen you for a little while, but we are just delighted. We are going to start our new session with a wonderful speaker today. So we really look forward to our session today. But just before we go into details of the session, we just want to make sure that you're in the right webinar. So we're going to be talking about paths of engagement. And with that, we just want to remind you about the team. So we're very thankful to Dr. John Higginbottom, whose brainchild this work is, really and truly. Myself, Regina, I think you've heard from me a lot of times. So, and also a big thanks to Jordan Clark, who's our technology expert. I'd like to introduce our two new team members. It's hard to say together, two new team members. On the left, we have Manny, and Manny comes to us as a graduate of our post-degree diploma program at Douglas College. She also has three little people and has a keen interest and commitment to psychosocial rehabilitation. Also, maybe not new to many of you, we have Jen Cusick with us, and Jen, you'll know, is an astounding facilitator and has done a lot of work with wellness recovery, action planning in particular, amongst many other topics of interest. So you may have seen her at the last conference here in Psychosocial Rehabilitation Conference at Douglas College in September. So they are a new team, and of course we're missing Matt today. You'll remember dear Matt, and you'll probably know that he's in medical school, and I think he's doing really, really well, and we're very grateful to him for his transition and support and help in getting us up and running today. So warm welcome. We noticed that we have 58 people on the line, so that's really fantastic, and maybe some of you are in the room with other people, but that's a really exciting re-entry for us. So hopefully everybody can hear us. Let us know if you're having difficulties. I think that you know that we are funded by the Ministry of Health to provide leadership, education and guidance to the mental health field and to develop and put effective evidence-based psychosocial rehabilitation into practice. We're very, very grateful to Douglas College because we wouldn't be here without them. And we're also extremely grateful to our presenters who do this work, honestly, with no remuneration. So it's really an amazing commitment that people have to our learning. And as I said, we couldn't do this work without them. So we're a big thank you to them. And you know that really we are focused on really promoting best and promising practices and good evidence-based practices in the recovery and PSR field. We'd love to hear from you if there's anything that you would like to learn more about, anything you feel that you have to contribute or would like to speak about. We would truly appreciate hearing from you. And then the last slide, I'm sorry that it's a bit elongated here, but it's just a little note about your feedback. Please know that we take your feedback very seriously. At the end of this presentation, you'll get some feedback about the learning goals, let us know how we're doing, and that's another place too to let us know if you have something that you would like to speak about. So with all of that in mind, a big warm welcome to our presenter for our session today, titled Paths to Engagement, Invitations to Wellness. And so we have our very special guest, Mark Goheen, and I hope that I'm saying that correctly. Mark has a MA and RCC, is a clinical specialist with Fraser Health Authority and Substance Use Services. He has served for over 30 years as a childcare worker, clinical counsellor, therapist in private practice, supervisor, researcher, teacher, and practice leader within public health and non-profit community agencies, so a depth and a breadth of knowledge and expertise. Over the last 8 years, Mark has developed and facilitated motivational dialogue workshops involving over 1,800 people, so that's quite a reach across Fraser Health and the province. He's committed to the evolution and the integration of practices and programs that are rooted in both sound evidence and a deep regard for the human spirit. So I really value that philosophical perspective that I think that some people bring to practice to help guide our each and every interaction with people. So with no more further ado, I'm going to pass you the slide, so don't panic. He's just going to focus on the things that may be most relevant to this group today. So there you go, there's Mark. Welcome, and here we are at Douglas College in Coquitlam. So thanks, Mark.
Thanks.
Over to
you. Thanks, Regina. I'm just recovering from a cold here. I'm feeling great today, but still a little bit congested. So if my speaking is not clear, I apologize, and please don't hesitate to ask for me to speak up or to clarify. I'm very thankful for being here today and an opportunity to share some ideas that have been developing over a number of years. And just a few minutes ago, I was speaking with Jen and talking about this idea of confluence, of ideas coming together and merging together. And I think historically in many programs and services or in academic circles, there's ideas used to have sort of like a versus between them, competing ideas. And I'm certainly much more interested. I think many people are becoming more interested with the value of when ideas come together, much in the way that when cultures come together or people come together, there's a synergy or a richness. And sometimes that means letting go of how ideas are slotted and categorized, and just being more comfortable with how things merge and blend. So that's where I'm coming from today. Just a few kind of contextual.
We're just doing a little bit of a sound check. We realize that some people are having a little difficulty hearing, so we're going to try and turn up the mic a little bit in the hope that will resolve the issue.
How is that? Just a kind of some context for some of the things that we'll be exploring. So I'm kind of thinking of being more of a tour guide here, and we're going to be kind of touring and exploring some ideas. One of the things I've worked very hard at is ensuring that ideas resonate in the heart. They also need to resonate in our hands, so to speak, when we're working. They need to be useful ideas, and third, there needs to be some foundation and evidence. It doesn't mean that all good ideas are rooted in evidence, but it's important to put our ideas to test and really see the extent to which they make a difference in people's lives. Much of what I hope to be sharing is based on the assumption that our learning is very much a process of reflection. What do these ideas mean to me? What do these practices mean to me? And that's evolving. I'm sure people have had this experience of coming into ideas in their life, and those ideas take on different forms and have different meanings and different implications 10 years later. So I'm just kind of throwing out some ideas for reflection. I also want to acknowledge that it's important that we be connected with what the intent is in our work. And my intent is always wondering about how we can develop partnerships with people to support people in being more fully human. And I'm very proud and energized by the developments that have been taking place over the last few years, which instead of trying to manage people or manage symptoms, we're definitely evolving in the direction of supporting people in being more fully human and living lives of quality rather than trying to manage people. So anyhow, that's kind of the context I'm coming from here today. The slides that I'm using are sort of a standard package of slides that I use, and I don't plan on covering all of them. They're just sort of tools or aids to help illustrate certain pieces, and so I'll be kind of jumping around. I should the title "Passive Engagement" is a very intentional title, and by that I mean that I really believe this, that and the evidence seems to support that, is that despite the names of our programs or the various roles and that we have, is that we are fundamentally in the engagement business, and the jury, I think, is long in. Across, no matter what type of sufferings we're talking about, what types of diagnoses, or whether it's about substance use or specific mental health challenges, that when caring, compassionate, skilled people engage with people, is that things get better. And sadly, when people who are suffering with mental health challenges or addictions, or whatever the case might be, and are not able to find opportunities to engage with compassionate, caring people, things tend to get worse. And there's a whole lot of studies making that pretty clear. So I'm thinking more and more that the relational skills that are involved in engagement is what determines how meaningful and how effective our work is. So I'm coming from a perspective that we are fundamentally in the engagement business. So that raises the question, what types of ways of being, so to speak, support good engagement? What types of knowledge, what types of skills, what types of ways of participating in people's lives best supports positive engagement? So hopefully it makes some sense. The downside to this, I think, is that formulas and procedures and algorithms and solutions that can be prescribed or written down independent of people and their lives are probably not something that's too helpful, which is a bit of an inconvenient truth, that this stuff is complex. It's based on relationships. So I'll just start jumping into it. If I hit the enter key, that'll advance the slides, or just the normal?
That little friend, I think we just have to click that twice, and then you should be good to go. If you want to try one more time.
Oops.
Yeah. There you go.
There we go.
Yeah. Should do it.
So I think it's important I just talk about this first slide as an idea, and this is a really concrete example of reflection. And I've been sharing this with people, and I think this has implications for our lives, whether we're serving people or being with family, people we care about. But imagine if in life we were given a remote control, and it has a little pause button on it. And this is really a form of mindful practice, but imagine, not that it would be kind of crazy if we lived this way, I think, but conceptually, imagine before we spoke or acted or kind of moved into a situation involving other people, we hit the pause button and took a deep breath or two and kind of calmly reflected on this idea, is that what is my hope, intent, or aspiration in doing this or saying this or even believing something? So when we come into our work, when we come into a service relationship, we're saying things and we're doing things, and whether we're consciously aware of it or not, we're coming from different, various perspectives or paradigms or ideas. And but this idea of having this clear sense of what my intent, sometimes this is referred to as intentional practice. And I don't know if any of you have had this experience, but you've said something or done something, and then later on, maybe the next day, said, I can't believe I said that. I can't believe I did that. And that's just sort of a concrete example. And I'm sure, I've had this experience many times where in my service to people, afterwards I kind of groan and say, I can't believe I did that or said that. And then my next thought was, what was I thinking? Where was I coming from? What was going on for me? And without exception, it's usually a place that where I'm not in attunement, or I'm not in harmony with my values or how I want to be in this world or how I want to show up in the lives of people. So anyhow, this is about slowing it down. And why this is important is that if we're talking about ideas, whether it's about motivational interviewing or trauma-informed practice, it's important that we're standing on a ground, so to speak, where we can be connected with what our intent, what our aspiration, or what our hope is. And coming from a place of mindful intent or mindful aspiration, I believe that we increase the likelihood of serving in a way that is consistent with the values that we hold such as, a value to be respectful, or to be client-centered, or to be compassionate, or to be flexible, or to be adaptive, or to be accepting. And motivational interviewing, as many of you know, is based on principles like that. And what I've learned over the years, and certainly observed this in myself and others, is that no matter how much we know, sort of in an intellectual sense, these principles, if we're not grounded to what our hope, intent, or aspiration with those principles, we end up violating those principles, or we end up kind of going amok or out of alignment with them. So I'm really, I believe it's important that a sense of mindfulness or a sense of intent is absolutely essential. No matter how good our principles are, if we're not in attunement with those principles, we end up saying and doing things that can hurt or injure or push people away. Sort of the antithesis of engagement. So anyhow, I find this is a very useful thing to have as a bit of a backdrop for no matter what we're doing. Oops. Probably worth just pointing this out. I think I'm assuming some of you have seen this before. This sometimes is referred to as the dirty dozen, and it was a bit of a tongue-in-cheek article written by a psychologist, Thomas Gordon, some years ago. But essentially, the point of the article is that if you want to be effective at having people have this experience that you're not listening to them, these are some of the things you can do. And over the years in sharing this list, some people were quite shocked by it, and people admitted that this kind of stuff happens quite often in our programs and services. This is not to suggest that these things are bad. There's a time and place for many of these things. It's just that, and this is based on some good research, that when us human beings are doing the types of things that are listed on the dirty dozen, the person on the receiving end is not likely to feel listened to. And of course, we know that the sense of being listened to is an absolute critical component of engagement. I'm sure many of you have received these experiences in your life where perhaps you're at a difficult place, you're really struggling, you reach out to another human being, and you get a bunch of advice, or people start making suggestions about books you can start reading, and it leaves you feeling unheard and not appreciated for what you're going through. Number 10, like sometimes people say, what's wrong with reassuring and sympathizing and consoling? Maybe some of you have had this experience where maybe you're grieving, maybe you're going through a really difficult time, and people said things to me like, there, Mark, time heals all wounds. Things will be fine. And inside, I don't feel fine. And I don't need someone to tell me that time will heal my wounds. And I remember people have come up to me and other people when we're in a process of grieving, not even speaking, just simply holding and feeling deeply heard. And that's the kind of stuff we're talking about. I know that I serve within Fraser Health, and I've noted over the years there's critical moments, especially when we first meet someone or sit down with someone, and of course that's a critical period in which we develop engagement and trust and respect and understanding, is that we often throw people all kinds of questions and probes. Much of my work has been in substance use services, so we start bombarding people with questions about what kinds of substances they're using and who in their family is using substances and how long they've been using it for, rather than just slowing down and looking someone and face to face and asking, how can I be helpful? How are you really doing? We bombard people with this. One of the ideas that I think is very much connected with this, and it's certainly become a bit of a mantra in the work that I've done, is that one of the greatest forms of human suffering is to be deeply misunderstood. And that hurts in a very profound way. And I'm sure some of you have had that experience, is to be deeply misunderstood. And But on the other side of the coin, and I think this speaks to some of the work that we do in the relationships we develop with people, is that one of the most powerful forms of medicine or healing is to be deeply understood. And I'm thinking more and more, and I think there's good research around that this idea of engagement is that much of engagement really involves showing up in the lives of people in ways that support and lead to another human being feeling deeply understood. And there was a time, I think, in many programs and services that was not well recognized or valued or seen as being sort of a warm, fuzzy thing. And one of the ideas that I'll keep putting out there, the evidence is strongly supportive that the extent to which that we're able to co-develop that deep understanding with people is the primary driver of the good outcomes that we're all hoping to witness in the lives of people. So it's not just sort of a touchy-feely thought anymore. It's that is evidence-based practice. And if there's anything I could really want to underscore today is that probably the most powerful evidence-based practice we have is how we show up in the lives of people. And I'm assuming all of you know what that looks like. That quality of relationship. And my hope is that you've had that experience in your relationships with some people, that a sense of being understood and a sense of being valued and respected for who you are. I do want to acknowledge, though, that there's this idea of ways of being and can get a little bit Zen-like sometimes, and my hope is that what I'm talking about here is something very close to the ground and something that we're quite familiar with. However, there are specific skills and languages that are associated with engagement, and another idea is that in relationship, we do need tools, so to speak, ways of developing that engagement, and we're very language-based, although there's other ways of communicating, nonverbal communications, but many of us in our work is that our conversations or dialogues we have with people is a very powerful part of developing those kinds of helping relationships. And so I think it is important that we develop a stock of language, a stock of words, ways of speaking to people that invite safety and trust and regard. So I'll certainly be throwing some of those out. So this idea of motivational practice or engagement, like why do we need this in our work? And in many situations, professionals are coming from a good place, and supports and helpers and family are coming from a good and caring place, and they're trying to get someone to change or do something positive around some of the challenges they're having, but it ends up becoming like a wrestling match or a power struggle, so to speak. And I'm sure as people know that often when you put more energy into a conflict or wrestling match, it's kind of adding fuel to the fire. So one of the ways to think about motivational interviewing or motivational dialogue or engagement practices in general, it's an alternative to wrestling or outwitting or outplaying people. Sometimes we want to use reason or logic or persuasion, or some people just raise the volume of their voice as tactics to engage with people. And of course, I'm sure people have had this experience, not just in serving other people, but also in life in general, that those ideas tend to make things worse, not better. It's kind of I like the metaphor of dancing. This idea of moving, especially in harmony. It's no one person pushing or pulling, but two people kind of stepping in similar directions. At a process level, that's a powerful way to think about conversations. What does it look like for our conversations to dance together, to be together in that sense, where no one person is pushing or pulling the other person? As a helper, there certainly is a responsibility and skill set in helping lead that dance, which is quite different from pushing and pulling. Just as an idea that's associated with leading is the language of invitation. So, in asking, well, I don't want to obviously push or pull or drag people, and I do feel like sometimes I need to kind of lead the conversation when someone doesn't appear to be ready or willing and able for positive change. Like, what does that look like? And I think that generally they're forms of invitations, and I'll talk more about that later. But to think about, we lead through invitation. In fact, I'm thinking that's another way to think about a lot of our work, is that one of the skills that's really important in helping in social and healthcare is sort of the art of invitations. How do we invite people into different ways of being more fully human, being more well? For those of you who may be involved in using dialogue to support change, such as psychotherapy or counseling, just want to touch on this and next few slides. And this has, I think, implications for all kinds of different roles. But I want to be clear, though, that the actual numbers and the research here is specific to people who are using counseling and psychotherapy to support positive outcomes in people with a range of mental health diagnoses. The research that I'll be talking about is not specific to any one diagnosis. It's across the entire spectrum of the DSM. And then the other piece I should really underscore here is that this isn't based on some obscure study. It came out of Norway last year or something like that. This is really based on a sort of boiling down about 30 years of research. So it's just a way of thinking about change. So there's a picture here of a young woman going to throw a soccer ball in the air, and kind of ask yourself, it's a bit of a science question, if you were to predict where that ball is going to land, what is it you'd want to know in making a prediction? And this is what people in physics and stuff do. So obviously there's things like wind and air temperature and humidity and how much force the ball is thrown and the angle of releasing the ball and all those other kind of things. And in fact, there are computer programs that figure these things out. But if we think about our work, what are the factors that influence where people's healthcare outcomes land, say, 5 years from now? What are the things that make the most difference? And this is probably something that doesn't get enough airplay in many of our programs and services, to really think deeply about what makes a difference, rather than assuming what I think is true is what's true. What does the research tell us? And it's mostly good news. The first news here, one of the ways of interpreting this is that humility is indicated. No matter how wonderful you are or we are, we're just not that powerful. We can make a very real difference in the lives of people, but we're not as powerful as some people may want us to be. So the bottom line is, those numbers, if you're into statistics, those are confidence intervals, meaning that we can be almost certain that somewhere between 80 to 87% of that stuff that influences where the ball lands, so to speak, we're talking about lives of people in this case, where their well-being lands, has nothing to do with treatment. As my son would say, it's just random stuff. And of course, everything's random. But it turns out, it's stuff that's, I'm sure it's like all of a sudden a neighbor moves in, and they're just an incredible human being. And because of how wonderful they are and the relationship you develop with this new neighbor, things get a whole lot better. And it has nothing to do with treatment. Or a neighbor moves in, and that person is, having a really hard time in life, and they're drinking and doing all kinds of stuff that's difficult and upsetting, and they're threatening you, and that can also be harmful to you. So it's the people who come in and out of our life that we don't really have a lot of control over. We know that employment, sometimes someone's unemployed and they're having a really difficult time, and just out of sheer luck, someone gives them a call and asks if they want to work that day, and they go into work, and it turns out people are wonderful there, and a month later the depression is better, and so there's all these different random things. So anyhow, looking at the piece of the trajectory here is that with a high level of confidence, somewhere between 13 to 20% of what we do that helps people is limited to about 13 to 20% of sort of the spin of the ball. Okay, so let's just take a quick look at the piece that we do have some influence over. This, by the way, for those of you who are familiar with the Serenity Prayer, this is sort of the version of the Serenity Prayer. Essentially, there's a whole lot of stuff that we don't have any control over, but there is a piece that we do, and sort of the wisdom here is to be aware of that and to sort of dig into that. And there it is. So this slice of pie, or treatment effects as we'll call it, in other words, the part of influence that we do have in people's lives, which is mostly relationship. It's almost all relationship. And motivational interviewing, by the way, is about the kinds of relationships that are most effective with people who are not necessarily sure if making changes makes sense. I don't want to get too much into the statistical stuff. It's not always the most exciting stuff. I should point out that there are other factors. Expectancy, allegiance, and placebo really means our belief systems that the helper and the person receiving help. If you believe that a certain approach, or if you believe that even talking about life problems is valuable and important, that has a real effect on outcomes. If you believe that talking is a waste of time and receiving support is something that you don't welcome, then it's probably not going to be useful. And the bottom piece, model and technique 1%, that creates some disturbance in some circles. And what that really means is that if you look at, there's different models or techniques or ways of working with people, and to what extent does it matter which model or technique you use? And it turns out very little. I think I have in the next slide. Yes, that one's a little bit hard to see. But the more current thinking is the models or techniques we use account for closer to 0% of the variance. What that really means that one way to translate that is if a person is struggling with a headache, and let me back up. A bunch of people have a headache, and you're doing some research, and some people, their headache got better, and other people it didn't. And you're using Tylenol, Advil, and aspirin. And you're trying to figure out to what extent does it matter whether you take Advil, aspirin, or Tylenol. It turns out they all both work the same. They all work, but the differences between them are very small. So that has implications sometimes when people get caught up in models and techniques being the right one. We're talking about recognized bona fide techniques in working with people. This doesn't mean that anything that somebody makes up is effective. It just means that the specific model isn't that critical. And getting back to the idea, and I really like this way of thinking about it. It's about how we show up in the lives of people, how we show up. It's not what we show up with, but how we show up with it. Okay? Hopefully that makes some sense. I apologize for this. This is the best I could do in stealing this illustration from Bruce Wampold. And if you look at this, we don't dig too deeply into it, but these are effect sizes, and if you're into statistics, Cohen's d, and that just really means about the strength of each one of these characteristics are in outcomes. Generally, effects of 0.2 and under are considered small, and effects of 0.5, 0.6 are considered large. So anyhow, the piece that I think is, as you can see, we have alliance. That's the quality of connection between the helper and person being helped. Empathy, that's about the extent to which the person essentially says, the person is helping me, gets me, they understand who I am, that deep understanding that I was referring to. The single most powerful variable in predicting outcomes, and this is, again, reflects about 30 years of research, is goal consensus or collaboration. And one of the ways that I interpret this, and I think this is an important idea in our work, is that everyone we serve talks about us behind our back. And so what are people saying about us, or what are the internal conversations people are having about us? And the more we can tap into that, the more effective we can be. And so when people are experiencing strong goal consensus or collaboration, what they're really saying to themselves, or maybe saying to other people, I'm working with this support worker, I'm working with this counselor, I'm working with this psychiatrist or social worker, or whoever the person might be, and the stuff that we're focusing on, the stuff that we're talking about, the stuff that we're working towards is really important to me. It matters to me. And of course, you can think about the converse of that, someone saying to someone else, yeah, I'm seeing this psychologist, I'm seeing this counselor, I'm seeing this support worker, and they got me working on the stuff that doesn't really matter to me, and I don't really care about it. Obviously, this has huge implications working with youth, because youth often feel that they're in helping relationships where they're kind of being forced to focus on things. So this is really pay attention kind of an idea that to what extent is it that you're working on, is it important to that person? And just very quickly on the right side of this, things like adherence to protocols, and even rated competence. This is something that's quite intriguing. How competent you are in the eyes of the person you're serving isn't quite as powerful. And the reason I say that is competence is not the same as someone feeling respected. So competence means in terms of actual skill sets or knowledges, people are much more interested in how you show up in the relationship in contrast to how competent you are. That's a very powerful idea. But it's also a very forgiving idea that even if you're not perfect or you don't know everything and you're not the know-it-all and about all the technical stuff, is how you show up in the relationship is much, much more powerful, particularly when you show up in ways that's connected to what's important to that person. So I really want to just take a breath here and underscore a really important point. What I'm speaking about here, these are not fuzzy, feel-good ideas. They feel good to me, but that's not why I think they're important. This is what over 30 years of research has shown. And for those of you who are interested in digging to this, check out the great psychotherapy debate by Wampold and Immel. And they've done their homework. This is based on some very serious research. And the numbers are out there for anyone to play with who are, some people don't like this kind of ideas. This is bad news, for example, for people who are invested a lot in techniques and models. It's probably worth, again, I'm just putting out ideas for reflection. It's probably worth just touching on this very briefly. This idea of the writing reflex, and it's something that happens naturally, is that we see someone going in a direction that's harmful. It could be about substance use or not taking their medication or not taking care of themselves or whatever the case might be. And we try to get people to stop doing that and start moving in a different direction. And that's what we mean by the writing reflex. And I don't know if you've ever been a victim of the writing reflex, so to speak, where someone's trying to get you to not do that, is that people tend to push back. So from an engagement perspective, it's and a mindful practice, so to speak, it's important to be aware of situations where you're getting caught up in this writing reflex. It's a very human thing to do, and especially with people that we love or care about, we try to get people to do something different. The problem is, from an engagement perspective, it tends to backfire. This is a study that's, I think, important just to identify very quickly. This one was looking at people who were, drinking alcohol in problems way, drinking too much alcohol, and they're getting help with professionals. But anyhow, the researchers were tracking how often the helper, the counselor, was making confrontational statements or providing expert interpretations, things like, well, the reason you drink is because you're not really dealing with your feelings and that kind of stuff. Or if you keep drinking, your life is going to continue to go in difficult ways and all that kind of stuff. But it turns out that, and this stuff was carefully tracked over time and over a year, and how people were doing with their drinking and their mental health. It turned out that the more often that helpers were making these well-intentioned confrontational statements and these very wise expert interpretations, the more that people drank. So and of course, people are just trying to be helpful, but sometimes the things that we think are helpful aren't that helpful.
Would you like to take a question?
Yeah, please. Yeah, any questions? Yeah, go for it.
So Leslie asks, hopefully Mike will pick this up. Does the effect difference vary when client or person start to identify helper as the case manager or therapist in ownership, as in ownership?
I'm not.
We can ask for a little clarification.
Yeah, that'd be good. I really want to honor that question, okay. Make sure I got it right.
So Leslie, just maybe as the presentation continues, we will ask you maybe just for some clarifying things, and then we'll come back to it if that's okay. Thanks, Leslie.
Yeah. So yeah, this is another question. Okay.
No, same
okay.
person. She's just.
Yeah. Okay. So this is another idea too, that now we're just talking about kind of motivation, how it is that people move towards or not move towards a change. And I'm just commenting on sometimes things I hear. I hear people say things like, well, he's not really motivated to change, he's just pre-contemplative, or he doesn't really want to help. And what we're learning literally in the research, that these kind of statements that people make are not so much true in the sense about the person we're talking about, but often reflect the kind of relationship we have. So, for example, when a person doesn't feel respected, or a person doesn't feel as if what they're working on is important to them, they're going to be resistant. And we say, well, they're being resistant, but we're often not looking at the extent to which the resistance is a bit of a pushback to how we're behaving. So this sounds really obvious, but this has not been well understood sometimes in many helping relationships. So this requires a certain humility and honesty. So if someone doesn't seem to be getting good with the program, so to speak, whatever that might be, what the research is suggesting, that rather than kind of assessing or pointing the fingers at that person, we need to kind of look at, it's not about blaming ourselves either, but looking at what we're saying or doing, our ways of being, how we're showing up in that relationship. And it turns out when people aren't motivated, that's more of a reflection of the kind of relationship they're experiencing. And the kind of the affirmative message is that if someone doesn't appear to be, quote, not motivated, that's probably a sign for us to dig in a little more deeply with how we're showing up in that relationship. And I know for myself it means asking questions like asking people to help me understand what's been helpful so far. Or when I meet with people, I might, bring out this, have you been involved with supports or helpers in the past? And if the person says yes, I might ask, what's been helpful, what's not been helpful? Based on your lived experience in receiving help, what is it that I need to appreciate or understand? Provide me with some advice. What recommendations would you have for me? My hope is to be helpful in your life, and for me to be helpful, what is it that I have to be aware of? Just reaching out, and this is also fit with another concept that, and this is kind of a deep idea, but is to really see the people that we're serving as also our teachers. And if we listen, if we keep our hearts and our minds and our hearts open, really open, is that the people we serve will teach us what it is that we need to understand or appreciate to engage more effectively. So this is less about doing things to people, more about how we open ourselves up or participate in relationships. And if we are respectful and invitational, there's a good chance that people will provide us with the kind of information or wisdom that we need so we can more effectively participate in that relationship. And that's true whether you're working with animals or people. If we really listen carefully in that relationship, this is true in marriages too, I think. In fact, the number one problem in marriage is people say, I don't feel listened to. So this isn't just some kind of technical thing. This is This is goes back to this idea of being more fully human. So for us to be effective in the human sense, it means we need to recognize the extent to which we're really listening, rather than describing or labeling or pointing fingers at people.
So Leslie did offer a little bit more detail about her initial question, and I'll just read it, and we'll try and put the pieces together, Leslie. So you asked, does the effect difference when the client or person start to identify helper as their case management therapist, as in ownership, and then she adds, as in teamwork partnership, or would it be a deflection?
Okay. I think what I might be picking up, and correct me if I'm going in the wrong direction, that kind of the hat we're wearing can really affect engagement. So I think maybe what you might be pointing at is that sometimes case managers can kind of grab the steering wheel and start driving someone's bus for them, and that can really take away from engagement. And so if we think about the programs and services and supports or whatever it is that we're bringing as sort of a bus, and we're going on an adventure or a tour or a journey on that bus, it's case managers maybe having the wheel of that bus, but it's absolutely essential that how we're driving that bus is very much in concert where the person wants to go. So that gets back to the practical, if any of that makes sense. The practical piece is constantly checking in around our case management roles, asking people about how we're doing as a case manager. What parts of the plan does the person feel most good about? What parts of the plan would they most like to see revised? In team settings, one of the questions I find very powerful to ask people, and that's when the whole team is there, is to kind of turn to the team and say, I would like just to check in, let's say, working with a woman named Susan. I'd like to check in with Susan for a moment, and I'm just paraphrasing the language. Is Susan, based on your experience so far, how are we doing? Do you have any feedback or advice for us as a team? What would you prefer that we do less of, more of, or different? So getting that kind of feedback. Because the key thing here is that even though people are coming from their best intentions, is constantly checking in with the person's experience, that we're not doing things to them, but we are working in harmony and partnership, working with people, walking alongside people. So having those very transparent conversations about how well we're walking alongside you, supporting what matters most to you. Even asking or more concrete questions, like if you were to give us as a team a letter grade, what grade would you give us? And if we wanted to be better students, improve our grade, what would you encourage us to do less of, more of, or different? So that's kind of just a practical way of asking it. I also find, by the way, is that when these kinds of questions get asked, it's useful to check in with the person about how they feel about being asked these kinds of questions. Sometimes people feel uncomfortable, or these questions are strange, and sometimes it's helpful to underscore that our questions are coming from a place that our hope is to really honor you and make sure we're doing the best possible job. And of course, other people love these questions. They feel very comfortable. I know that, but sometimes people feel a little bit suspicious about these kinds of transparent questions when they haven't had experience in the past with professionals and helpers being so open and so transparent. Does that help?
Yeah, we'll just wait for a response, but thank you kindly. Awesome was the response. Thank
Okay,
you.
Great, thank
Thanks,
you.
Leslie.
So, I'm aware that, there's not really enough time to dig into, all these kind of skill sets or techniques that sometimes I know people are interested in, and so I'm really trying to underscore kind of the reflection, how we show up in the lives of people when we're interested in developing good engagement. Here's another reflection question, and I know for some people this is obvious, but I have seen in our health and social care systems this idea just doesn't seem to be recognized, that being right and being effective are not necessarily the same event. And so I've sometimes witnessed people because they believe that they have the test results, or they know the diagnosis, or they have a strong belief about a medication or a certain path of rehabilitation. They don't let go of it, and the energy seems to be about sort of what's the word, trumping their idea about something. Like, it could be about their, if you keep smoking cannabis, you'll never get better. Like, well, I don't know, maybe they're right. I don't know. I mean, cannabis can be a problem if you smoke it all day long, every day, and you're trying to get healthy. It sometimes gets in the way, or drinking heavily, or not exercising, or whatever. But there's a whole list of things that you can be absolutely right about, but sort of banging the person over the head with it can push people away. So I'll give you a concrete example. Instead of saying, if you continue to smoke cannabis, you're never going to get better, or the medication isn't going to help you, rather than saying that is to ask someone a question. And so, based on your experience, in what ways has cannabis helped you feel more unhealthy? In which ways has cannabis perhaps got in the way of being more healthy? And even if a person doesn't have the right answer, just encouraging people to really reflect on the truth of their relationship with substances, that kind of stuff. So getting people to be almost interested in their own life and what's going on, as opposed to telling them how it is. I'm not suggesting that sometimes we do have to say things very plainly and stuff, but helping people, inviting people to be curious about things often is much more effective in telling them how it is. If you've ever been a parent, you know how important this is. I've always reminded my children when they were younger that, as their dad, I'm always right. But that didn't necessarily make me effective as a parent. I still like to say everything I've said has been right, but it doesn't mean they hear it. So I have to be much more interested in what they're feeling and what they're thinking, what their needs are, even though I am right as a parent. Oh, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so I'm just aware of the fact that we don't have a lot of time to get into some technique-y stuff. I mean, I'll just go really quickly here. This is another idea that some of you might be familiar with, but it's a really important sort of position from which to reflect on our own practice and the conversations we're having with people. But really quickly, when we're thinking about effectiveness, another way to think about that is, to what extent do we support people in experiencing a sense of belonging to community, to family, to the world? I know that many of the people I've worked with over the years sometimes feel they don't belong, or I've never fit in anywhere, or, certainly people who are targets of stigma feel this. And I know that in my work with people who are struggling with homelessness, feel this in very profound ways. So if we think about our words and our actions and our programs and our beliefs, how do we support people in feeling this sense of belonging or connection? By the way, with youth in particular, this is probably the most powerful driver of health outcomes in general, the extent to which feeling belonging. The other piece is recognizing, and this fits in a little bit with trauma-informed practice, that many people that we are privileged to serve have experienced wounds and violations in all kinds of different ways. Not, the obvious things like sexual and physical abuses, but violations of the spirit, violations of a person's dreams. And so if we think about our words and our language and how we show up in people, how do we support people in experiencing an increased or enhanced sense of sacredness, that all people are sacred? And so, of course, many people don't feel that. So this is an important piece in our words. And then the final piece, and this really fits in tightly with motivational practice, is this notion of liberation. And by liberation, what is meant here is the extent to which people are free to be who they are. There's a wonderful idea. It came from a client, and it goes something like this: is I don't have to fight to be who I am. And think about some of the relationships you might have experienced in your life from childhood onwards, where it somehow felt that you had to fight to be who you are. Now think about some of the people that you've been with, or hopefully are still in your life, where that when you're with that person, or when you're with that group of people, you do not have to fight to be who you are. And whether we're talking about culture or gender or sexual orientation or just the fact that you like poetry, is that you don't have to fight to be who you are. And think about what it means when we show up in the lives of people and how we participate in the lives of people. So the person has this experience that when I'm with you, I don't have to fight to be who I am. Very quickly, we're just I'm just shifting into some specific stuff about motivational practice. This has huge implications. Sometimes people say things like, he's motivated or she's not motivated. Motivation has components. It turns out that sometimes when people appear to be not motivated, it's more about just not being ready. That maybe a person's feeling some anxieties, or the reason they're not going to pursue their education is because they're broke. Or maybe they're under too much stress right now, or they don't have stable housing. So it's really important to get curious with people about what being ready would be. Committed, that's what we typically mean by motivation, the extent to which someone's committed. But here's the piece that's probably often overlooked, is that motivation is powerfully associated with this idea of self-efficacy, this idea that I can do that, or I think I can do that. Obviously, if you're going to, I don't know, if you're mountain climbing and you're going to jump from one ledge to another, and if you don't think you can do it, it's probably a good idea not to be motivated to do it. So it's natural that we're constantly making these appraisals about our ability. Unfortunately, many people have ideas about their ability that aren't true. They often have negative ideas about their ability based on their experiences of what they've been told. So the reason that someone, quote, appears to be not motivated is not because they don't want it, because inside the person believes or they're afraid that they can't achieve it. And that's painful, so it makes sense to avoid it. The final piece is another area that doesn't get enough airplay, I think, is sadly many people in our world sometimes aren't making positive changes because at a very deep level don't believe they're worth those changes. And I've witnessed this in so many different ways. And so having all these kind of techniques to motivate people doesn't make a whole lot of sense if deep inside that person does not feel enough sense of sacredness to do that. It's almost like, why bother? Does it really matter? I've met people like they're smoking themselves to death, and a person says things, well, does it really matter if I quit smoking? My life is worthless anyhow, that kind of stuff. And of course, there's a history to that. People aren't born in this world believing that they're not worth happiness or good things. So people are sadly pushed into these ways of thinking about themselves and feeling about themselves. So this is why our work is so important, is that if we can show up in the life of a person and help that person discover their sacred and worth, a lot of these motivational issues disappear very quickly. Of course, we just can't tell people they're worth it. We have to we have to demonstrate that, not just mouth the words. I was going to jump ahead very quick. I can find it if we have enough time here. There's some very practical questions you can use to tap in. I just don't have this very well organized. Sometimes scaling questions, asking people questions all from 0 to 10 can be really helpful. These are just examples. I find it most useful to ask a question like this as the first question when we're talking about change, or whether it's about case management. But I'm just reading on a scale from 0 to 10, how important is it to you to be tobacco-free? And then people can give a number, and it's really, I think it's not about getting numbers, but discussing. I mean, if the number is really high, is to discuss what that's about, how long they've been in there. If the number is really low, again, is really listening carefully about what that's about. Or does that person sense that other people believe it's important? Like the doctor says it's really important that you quit smoking, but a person may not believe that. But to explore what it's like to be at that place, and sometimes people are being shamed or pressured, or maybe someone's feeling really encouraged. I like to ask if someone's a bit higher on the scale, asking if there was a time in their life they'd be quite a bit lower, and how is it that they're at a higher place now? What is it they see about themselves or life that's encouraging them to develop this kind of commitment? This is a bit of a deal breaker question. Again, if someone is really low on this one, on a scale from 0 to 10, how confident do you feel that you could become tobacco free? Someone says 0 or 1, I've tried to quit before, I just can't do it. I don't know, I can't make, some people believe that I just can't make changes, other people can, but I just can't do anything. So obviously if a person's feeling that, it's important to help that person identify the things that they can do, or some of their skills or capacities, or exploring past successes they've had, even at very, very small things, or creating opportunities for people to be successful. And this is the real deal breaker question. Obviously, if someone's low on a scale from 0 to 10, how strongly do you feel that you're worth the benefits of living tobacco free or in a nonviolent relationship? And someone says 0, like around a nonviolent relationship, obviously that's important to pull the bus over, to hear what's going on for that person. By the way, this often will tap into people feeling defeated by life or even suicidal by life. So this can get to some pretty important but very, very deep places. And then finally, just very quickly, it's a bit of a technique-y thing. If you're kind of feeling that the person's becoming a little more open or a little more encouraged about making change, this can be a really helpful question. On a scale from 0 to 10, how strongly do you feel that you're ready to launch on being tobacco-free or making that change or looking for new housing or whatever the case might be? And from a helper point of view, is to ask that person, what could I do more of, less of, or different to support you in being ready? And that fits in really nicely with case management planning. Or as a team, what could we do more of, less of, or different to better support you in being ready? So those are some very practical questions. And I'm not suggesting those are the right ways to language those. Those are just examples. But those 4 dimensions, though, I think are crucial to pay attention to. That any time that some issues or concerns about motivation, the person doesn't seem to be ready, willing, or able to move in a direction, is to get really curious about where they stand on that. So asking those kinds of questions. And if you discover the person's on the lower end of any of those scales, I believe that's, well, from a motivational practice point of view, that's a very strong sign to kind of just pull the bus over and not get caught up in trying to push that person out of that, but take the time to deeply appreciate what's that like for that person, and especially their sense of pressures from other people or judgments from other people. And then finally, ways in which you could support that person, maybe nudging up. Like for example, so let's say a person's at 5 on a readiness scale, is asking, what are some small things that I could do more or less or different to maybe help you move from, say, a 5 to a 6? Or what's something your family could do, or something that we could do. But get curious about small shifts around that, rather than trying to solve big problems. Would that be a good place to shift gears for questions, or?
Sure, that sounds like a great place to shift gears and questions. Just let us begin by saying thank you very much to Mark. I think what you've helped for me is to put some flesh on bones of competency in terms of relational practice. I think you've helped us think about some language about how to be present, and I think you've helped us think about some specific strategies for ensuring that we don't remain in our own bubble while we're attempting to be present for somebody else. So really, thank you for that. Of course, as somebody who likes thinking about thinking and likes academics and thinking about models and practices, it's always really good to be challenged. But I think one of the contributions of recovery-oriented practice and psychosocial rehabilitation practice is that it's often a values-based model. And so sometimes when we think of some of the slides that you've showed earlier, and we say that maybe models don't hold such a strong position in the change process. Sometimes I think when the models are values-based or recovery-orientated that encompass, or if I'm being a good practitioner or an effective practitioner, I'm really thinking about what strategies am I using to enable people to engage in their recovery journey, with me for sure, but in their recovery journey. And I love your idea about pulling the bus over to the side and checking in and seeing where we are. We would love to invite questions, or maybe some people have comments they wish to make. We're here until 12 o'clock, so we'd just like to open the floor, because as we know, Mark is a collaborative soul, and so when we asked him about the length of this presentation, he was saying, well, it'll really depend on people who are participating. So maybe you have comments. I'm just rambling, I know, but purposefully, to give you a little moment maybe to just think about, maybe you have a comment or a question or a contribution that you wish to make, and maybe you have comments as well, Mark. And as you were thinking about those last slides, Mark, I was just thinking about the Boston model of PSR and just the whole readiness piece and how aligned those things were. So it just sometimes it feels good to be thinking about PSR and recovery and bringing some of these elements together, thinking about the research and how we know that interactional piece is the single key tool that we have in our toolbox, and to be able to hone that with language and behaviors that make sense and that offer people a way forward.
I mean, there's three basic layers, I think, that at a process level that are important to pay attention to, no matter what kind of motivational model or whatever it is that, how people want to describe that. The first is to support and encourage people in developing a vision. And for some people, it's a verbal description. Some people, they develop a collage. Like one of the things I really like, by the way, is a bit of a technique-y thing, is that you provide people with scissors and glue and poster board and lots of magazines and stuff, and invite people to put together an image that helps other people understand what matters to you and what your hope is for your life. And people put all kinds of interesting things. But the idea is that, and like I share with people, is that you can put that up on a wall and you don't have to say a word, because people will look at that and say, you know what, I think I get it. I think I get what your hope is. And for other people, there are very clear, concrete descriptions of things. But anyhow, it is to support people in giving voice or conveying that vision. And the second piece is to learn from the person, or co-develop with that person a way of supporting that vision and unfolding. And then the third, as our relationships, as our partnerships support people in moving towards that vision, is to help support and sustain that vision, which often gets overlooked. Launching a ship's not the same as the ship arriving there. And that's because people bump up against challenges, or they feel defeated, or whatever the case might be. And this is why it's important for people to have support systems, whether those are organic social support systems or professional support systems, but to really be present along that journey, especially when people have had challenges in launching and maintaining journeys, whether that's recovery from substances or recovery from another kind of challenge, but to really stay present beside that person, help them maintain that journey.
We've had many accolades and appreciations from people online, so thank you, Mark. We also have a really great question. Do you have any suggestions about the name of a case manager changing this to one that is more in line with the recovery model? So I think that's, again, bringing back notions of language that you did early in the presentation.
I love that. Yeah, sometimes we have to use language. It's just, sometimes language is just, we don't know what else to do, so we got to give something a name. But case manager can have connotations. Manager is kind of a heavy-handed. Case manager. It's like, so, I mean, I don't know, but sometimes people are uncomfortable with poetic language too, which I wish we would use more poetic language. But I'm thinking about the idea of vision, what it would mean to be a vision support or a vision coordinator.
Cool, sir.
I'm here to serve as a vision coordinator, almost like a travel agent does, or a wedding or an event planner. They're not there to tell people what the menu is or what the music's going to be or how it's going to work. I'm here to serve. By the way, there's a we didn't get time to get into this, but one of the four core principles of motivational practices is compassion, and that's a concept that gets used in lots of different ways. But from a motivational perspective, and it fits in with what I'm trying to touch on here, I think, and I love the question around a case manager, is this idea to be present in someone's life in a way that says this: I am here, I am present to serve your cause. Mm-hmm. And not to waver. It's not about my agendas or my needs or my fears or whatever. It's to really dig into that very deeply, to serve your cause with humility, with grace, and with a kind of an openness that cause can change and unfold over time. So for us to serve someone's cause, that's why it's so important that we continue to check in with people. I mean, it's and for some people, using this kind of language makes sense. I mean, I've asked people to give me some feedback about how well I'm serving their cause. Right. And it gets back to the first piece, is to help people articulate or communicate that vision or cause, so to speak. And for some people, it's very concrete. Right. Some people their cause is they want to find a part-time job, or they just want people to stop saying mean things to them. But to join, that idea of joining people in that cause.
Right. So. Yeah. We've also had lots of great comments around including art therapy and dance and various other modes of intervention, which I think is really good. We had some people one person saying they used a recovery and rehab partner as a term instead of case manager, which I think is really quite wonderful. And then we had one person is asking how to enact this way of being within a contract action type of intervention. So if I understand that question correctly, I guess, some organizations have real hardcore outcomes that they're needing to show, I think. So please, whomever posted that question, if I haven't got that right, just let me know. But I think that's the question.
I bumped into that quite a bit. People will say, well, this is all well and good in this perfect world, but we have to do things to people, or we have these contracts and stuff. And the first thing that I would really invite people to kind of investigate, so to speak, with the contract, is to look at the principles that inform contracts. I often hear that people are being told that they can't be client-centered. And then when you go back and look at the contract, even I've seen contracts where the word client-centered is being used. So sometimes it's how these things get translated. So that's the first thing I'd want to investigate. To what extent is this impositional kind of feel to this? Is that more of how this stuff is being reflected in our culture or in our program? And to what extent is this really what the contract compels me to do? I like to believe, and the contracts I've seen, the contracts are really are based on people being accountable and effective. The other comment is if you are serving someone and there is something about a contract or a program or some kind of restriction or something going on, and you believe, and a person you're serving believes that it's oppressive, that it's a block, that it's an obstacle, this is my own belief too, is to really listen deeply to how the person we're serving is experiencing that oppression, that block, that impediment, that requirement, whatever it is, and helping support that person in giving voice to that experience. That could mean letter writing campaigns to the funder. Helping that person even write a letter to support people writing letters to MLAs or funders and stuff. So rather than me sort of banging the drum, support people in voicing how this is landing on their life. The other one is to feel a sense of validity in this experience and creating sanctuary or community around it is is I know sometimes people, like they'll often, it gets almost resentful, or people are complaining or resentful, but to recognize underneath that there's something important that we honor in that experience, and encouraging managers and coordinators and supervisors and colleagues to really look at if there is in fact something going on here that's not consistent with the evidence. And this is important too. This is why evidence is, and I know that people know this, but we need to keep saying, is that partnership, collaboration, client-centered, client feedback, all of those ideas, that's what the evidence says. And I'm not aware of any contract that would compel us to violate good evidence-based practice. So this is a bit of a professional comment. If you are being paid for what you do, is you do have an obligation to work from an evidence-based perspective. And if you believe there's some component of a contract or a program that is compelling you to not operate in an evidence-based way, I think there's a bit of almost a professional or almost a citizen responsibility is to try to talk about that in a constructive way and see if it can be changed. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I think it's part of what I'm saying is that sometimes these ideas, well, we're not allowed to do that, or we can't do this, or our contract says this, is to maybe, if you think about it almost like a knot, is to pull it apart a little bit and see what's really there, and see if there's some room to be creative or flexible or adaptive, or to dialogue with the funder. Sometimes funders write things in contract, and that's not the intent.
I really appreciate what you're saying, Mark. Maybe some of you saw last week a webinar with the Mental Health Commission of Canada, and they had a really good speaker, Janice Tandora, who's also been to our PSR conference in Thunder Bay this year. But I think she speaks very much in keeping with Mark in terms of being able to do some person-centered planning that outlines somebody's goal or vision for the work together, or where they want to be, more importantly, in their life, and then be able to collaboratively develop a way to get there. And she is speaking from working with some very constrained behavioral organizations in the US, but has found a way to be able to make that very much person-centered. So I think there's lots of joy in hearing that from different perspectives, and I think it sort of challenges us in a way as well to maybe think about those systems in which we may find ourselves, to be able to more ably engage with people in ways of their choice.
The other comment I like to make is that, you know, things like contracts and organizations and institutions and stuff aren't necessarily evil. There's no evil intent.
Yeah.
I think, but sometimes we end up getting, blaming organizations. Sure. But by definition, is that large organizations or contracts or bureaucracies, whatever we would want to use, sometimes just don't have a lot of dexterity. So I sometimes like to think of large institutions or these kinds of things as just having thumbs. And part of our job is to give them fingers, to give them dexterity. And that is our job. But it's not about like standing up to it and defeating it, but thinking about, so here's a contract, and how can I translate this in a way that's flexible and adaptive, much like a shoemaker or a chef, is that adapting the menu or adapting what you do so it fits the person. And that is good practice. We do, I'm not aware of any contract that says you are not permitted to be flexible, adaptive, and creative and compassionate in your service.
Laura makes a good point too, that one thing we forget sometimes is that policymakers are part of the team as well, and so that they're not these people far away in the clouds where we can't actually connect with them, but if we're doing a good job, that we're able to give them fingers as well, because people, I think, generally are trying to do the right thing, but it's finding the pathway to do that. We also had another great comment from Laura about compassionate to self, and so I know we have Jen here sitting in front of us, who did a really great session at our last local PSR conference on self-compassion. For sure, I think self-compassion, we talk about, really pondering on the work that we do being vital as well. I think sometimes, having worked in a big mental health service for a long time myself too, is just re-energizing and being mindful ourselves and trying to honor the work that we're doing as well, so that we value it and therefore it's our best work, so that people can really latch on or benefit from some of the tools hopefully we bring to the table.
Yeah, that sometimes is referred to as the kind of the buzzword now is this intrasubjective part of our work, is that what does it mean to be in this work? What is that experience about? The ways in which working or the service that we do supports us in being more fully human.
Right.
We're inviting
Right.
other people to
Right.
be more fully human, but how does it support us? Another idea that's around that I think is really helpful is that in our work it's important that we take up a loving stance with people that we serve, and also to take up a loving stance with ourselves, because sometimes we won't measure up, or
Yep.
we make mistakes or have a bad day or whatever, but to also take a loving stance. Just very quickly, there was a story that was shared with me the other day around this, which I really appreciate. It's one of those Gandhi stories. But anyhow, this woman, her child has diabetes and he's very ill and won't listen. So she drags him to see Gandhi. I don't know why she. It's kind of interesting. So, but he has to stop eating sugar or he'll die. That's what the doctor says. It's quite bad. And Gandhi says, "Come back in 3 days." And so the mother drags this kid back to see, the all-knowing, all-wise Gandhi in 3 days. And Gandhi says, "Stop eating sugar." And the mother's outraged, like, "Well, why couldn't you have told him this 3 days ago?" And Gandhi said, "Because I hadn't stopped eating sugar yet."
Oh, no kidding. Wow. Wow.
But if we're inviting people to practice loving kindness towards themselves or take up a loving stance with themselves, it's important that we work at the same.
Well, that's a pretty profound place to be. Yeah. I remember working for a healthcare organization and being a health and wellness coordinator for our organization, and it certainly put a little bit of fire under me to maintain my own health and wellness as well. But I really like this conversation that's focused on people delivering services as well, and just focusing on that, potential for health as well. Because if we're not functioning at our best selves, then we're not able to give our best. I also love this conversation about, just being more fully human. And many of you who are PSR and recovery people, I think many of us look to Dr. Patricia Deegan, who was one of the first authors in that field, thinking about being more fully human. And I think we've all drawn so much from that literature and that work, and so very grateful to when we get to this place in the conversation of moving from models to technologies to evidence-based practices to, let's face it, people, we're just people and we're trying to do our best. And I love that we're here. I think that's really good. Just to respond, we've had many questions to say, will these slides be available? And I promise they will, as all of our other 32 archived sessions. What we do with this work is we upload it, the royal we, it'll be Jen and Manny, because I'm not very skilled at that, but we upload that to a YouTube video, and then that will be available to you on the PSY Rehab site. So this same site, psyrehab.ca, and we hope to get that to you in a week. So it's our first time trying to do it and edit it, so we're learning all kinds of good things. So please know that great information from today will be available to you. So we'll just leave the chat open for another second or so, see if anybody has last thoughts. We hear from Sandra. She gives us 2 thumbs up. That's always good to hear. Ashley says, thank you for a great webinar. Laura says, great workshop. So yeah. And Carmen says, thank you so much. Hello there, Carmen, for a very inspiring session. Manny says the PowerPoint will be available. Thank you, Manny. What a team we are at psyrehab.ca. Thank you, Manny, for that.
We didn't get time to really dig into some of the languages and stuff like that. If people are interested, if you go through the slides, there's lots of examples of different kinds of languages that, ways of using language. Like example, these are referred to evocative questions, really inviting people to speak to their experience, their ideas. Just really quickly, Insu Kimber, wonderful social worker, but long story short is that her first language is Korean, and so she had to learn English, and she said that the most powerful word in the English language is suppose. Right. You know. So there's all kinds of, I literally do have a crystal ball in my office, and I use this question just as a practical thing.
So cool.
Suppose you looked into a crystal ball and saw your life 1 year from now. What would you most hope is different? What would you most welcome? That kind of stuff. So, or suppose you ended your relationship with tobacco. What might your lungs say? So, but it's, you know, it's rather than us telling people how it is, inviting. This is what I meant by invitation. So the word suppose really invites.
So Mark, again, big thank you. Lois, I'm just going to draw on your comment there. Very down-to-earth presentation as we're talking about crystal ball. So that is quite a magical intersection, I think. Thanks, everybody, for being on the line. Thanks for spending your hour and a half with us. We really appreciate it. Please stay tuned. We have lots planned for you, in particular, a series around supported education coming up. And we have a number of other, 2 other workshops happening before the holiday break. So again, so Carmen adds that she has a magic wand in her office.